Hello and welcome back to the third game for this Saturday of the World Cup of Pokémon VGC, hosted by Victory Road and sponsored by Elgato. My name is Jamie Boyd and I am joined by Ben Kiriakou, and I'm a little bit jealous that you got to cast over such cool Pokémon in that last game.
Yeah, it could have been a Jamie Boyd team that we were casting over with Felipe, just picking some really off the wall choices, so to speak, but doing it in a way that was so clever and actually supported the Xerneas really well in his composition and dealt with all of the problems. Unfortunately, except for Scarf Regieleki, which I think is definitely a choice that he made, and definitely not something that you see in every single matchup. And once Emmanuel worked out that that was the way that he was going to get through Felipe's team, it was really quite straightforward, I think, for him to just click Electro Web and go through the game. And I turned from quite a dicey game one to a very, very game two and three. So without further ado, though, we are going to be playing off with Peru versus France in this next match of the World Cup.
Yeah, we can have a look at how the teams are currently doing. So it looks like it is 3-1 to Peru here against France. So really strong showing for Peru. I just need that one extra win to come out for them to get that draw, and then just two more to get the win as well. So yeah, it's a really, really good start for Peru.
Definitely. And France have already qualified in this group, so they are definitely going to be going through to the next set. Peru only needs to win one more match now with their standings. They only need to win 4 sets to secure their qualification into the next stage of the tournament. And Peru have been so good so far, as have France. So France have played some cracking matches against Japan, and Peru with matches against so many countries that have been so dominant, have been coming out on top as well. So great to see two top teams going up against each other and using a little bit of a mix of stuff. I mean, we see quite a few Zacian there, a little bit of Calyrex Shadow Rider, and of course one Groudon versus one Kyogre. And certainly nice for me to see anyway that the Groudon coming up on top in that matchup between those two Pokemon setting the weather.
Of course, yes. And they will be either facing Italy or Singapore going into the next top 16, as they have also already qualified. So we'll just have to see which way around we're going to be doing this, whether Peru is able to get those extra wins coming out for them. Just needing that one extra win. They've got the 3 already. They just need 4 to advance. So we could be seeing Peru advance at the end of this game, potentially coming out from these 2 players, who we can now have a look at what they are going to be bringing to this matchup. So we can start off with Peru here with Sebastian Solari. They're going to be rocking those 6 very tried and true Pokemon coming out there with that Zacian: Incineroar, Rillaboom, Suicune, Regieleki, and Landorus Therian.
Indeed, and this sort of build for Zacian has really come into its own in the last sort of few weeks, maybe a month or so, with the format where Suicune gets paired pretty now commonly with the Zacian, offering Tailwind and Snarl, and other forms of support. Could be Icy Wind as well, or just going for that Roar, so stopping things that set up like Volcaronas that you tend to see in Zacian builds, Xerneas builds that tend to give Zacian a little bit of trouble as well. So nice to see that sort of solid composition. I'm looking forward to seeing how this Landorus Therian performs as well, depending on what the matchup with France's player is, because normally you see a Landorus Incarnate in this kind of composition where the sheer force and the life orb combined with things like Earth Power and Sludge Bomb and Stone Edge and Rock Slide and other really damaging moves are so powerful. But Landorus Therian offers instead the ability to pivot with U-turn and those same sort of coverage moves, but quite a bit weaker, in fact. And it could really change the matchup depending on what their opponent is going to be bringing. So we'll have to see what that's going to be and what lineup France is bringing to this match.
It looks like they are going to be bringing that Torn Ogre team. I still need the name of the core of Tornadus, Kyogre, and Serena, because they are very much a core at this point. Although we did see Talonflame over the Tornadus in that first game, but also going to be rocking that Regieleki, Incineroar, and a Mamoswine as well.
Indeed, and that Mamoswine changes the matchup quite considerably for Damahni. He's going to be able to knock out that Landorus Ferrian really easy. And now that it has access to, or now that it has Oblivious, which has been buffed in this format, so now Intimidate isn't effective on Mamoswine. It's going to be able to be launching out its moves at full power. Not that that necessarily makes too much of a difference when you've got Kyogre on your team, and Kyogre is definitely one of those Pokemon that you want to be facing down against a Landorus. So more likely that we're not going to see the Mamoswine, unfortunately, in this matchup, and it's just going to be a case of how that Kyogre is trained, whether it's holding a Choice Scarf, whether it's holding Mystic Water or another item, and of course whether that Tornadus is going to be carrying the Icy Wind as well as Tailwind to keep the speed control, and how the Tsarina is whether it's Assault Vest or a berry of some description as well. So, a few options within this core, but all of these things make it really quite difficult for them to, both players, in fact, to have to feel out their opponent in games 1 and 2 and just decide on how is actually best to approach this match.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting game going forward, and something worthy of note as well going into this game. If Peru do win this match, they would send themselves into the top 16. That would knock Japan out of the tournament. So this could be a very crucial game in that regard. Japan able to just survive in that week before we did see on stream, but this game could be knocking them out instead. So all the control is in Peru. They just need to win one more set, and they've got quite a few in hand. They could be doing it right now with this game here. If the France are able to take it, then they'll still have quite a few games in hand, but we could be seeing Peru go through and Japan knocked out after this game.
And that would be really interesting. I mean, Japan's one of those teams that you'd always think would be a contender for at least the playoffs in these kind of tournaments. But without further ado, let's get ourselves into the match and we'll see how these players have decided to go about their turns. We've seen our team preview coming into the 4 now with that Zacian, Regieleki, Landorus, Incineroar, Rillaboom, and Suicune. And of course, the Tornadus, Kyogre, Incineroar, Tsarina, Regieleki, and Mamoswine.
Yeah, we can see how defensive that Landorus is, going to be rocking the Assault Vest, not the Assault Vest, the Rocky Helmet as well. So yeah, going to be really doubling down on getting those reductions in the damage with the Intimidates and getting that passive damage going with the Rocky Helmet rather than Life Orb. The Suicune has the safety goggles as well, so it could be going for those roars next to the Amoonguss with the Xerneas, but not going to come into play too much here, but could be setting up the Tailwind to match the Tornadus that could be setting up as well.
Certainly, and one of the things that will make a difference in this matchup certainly is that Regieleki is holding a Focus Sash, so to make Kyogre potentially faster than the Regieleki if it's not carrying that Choice Scarf, you have to go for the Tailwind if you're Tornadus, and that allows Regieleki to at least get one move off, likely the reason that we're seeing it led here in this game. And so you've got that difficulty with something like Tornadus and Kyogre. There's like, okay, so what item is that Regieleki? If it's Choice Scarf, then you can't, you have to get the Tailwind up. If it's Focus Sash, then you kind of have to try and attack into it, or maybe get the Tailwind up and leave it on its Focus Sash. And so, yeah, this first game, definitely an information gathering one, and going to be down to these players to work out the best way and the safest way of finding out as much information as doors.
It seems like the way to find out will be Regieleki and Tornadus coming out here against the opposing Regieleki and Rillaboom. So Regieleki and Rillaboom as the lead, really doubling down on being able to take care of a potential Kyogre lead that didn't actually come out.
No, and Kyogre's one of those Pokemon like, is it coming out onto the field? Yes or no? If yes, and I don't lead and I'm not ready for it, then I'm just going to get a Water Spout to the face, and that is not something that anyone wants to come out. So a combination of Regieleki and Rillaboom really covers that Kyogre to be in the lead, and quite often you see players that run Kyogre not leading the Kyogre because of the way that Sebastian certainly and other players tend to lead very strongly against it. And of course, when you're in that position, certainly with the Rillaboom as using that to tech for the Kyogre, you've got to worry about those Hurricanes coming into it.
Not on this turn, though. The Tsarina is going to be switching in for that Tornadus, which is going to be taking the Thunderbolt from Sebastian's Regieleki very comfortably. And a Volt Switch from Damahni is going to be fired off from their own Regieleki, revealing the Life Orb as well, doing a lot of damage to that opposing Regieleki, doing about 2/3 of the damage already with that resisted hit. and going to be able to reposition themselves straight back into that Tornadus. And now we're going to have to see what the Rillaboom's going for, just that U-turn, and targeting down what was that Regieleki, going to hit for minimal damage into the Tornadus, but another bit more pivoting coming out from Sebastian here.
Yeah, interesting actually, because you potentially broken a Focus Sash there on the Tornadus while trying to potentially break a Focus Sash on the Regieleki, so it could be a little bit of a win-win here, but now the Tornadus has the opportunity to go for that Tailwind, and unfortunately for Damahni, the Sarina isn't likely to be outspeeding the Regieleki on Sebastian's side of the field after an Electro Web. So if Tailwind goes up and Electro Web goes off, then the Sarina is likely going to go down to a Behemoth Blade, and maybe you take some knockouts and the Kyogre comes in, but you've got that Rillaboom in the back if you're Sebastian, so not so much of an issue, especially if the Sarina gets knocked out, and then you open up the ability for Grassy Glide to come out and pressure that Kyogre really effectively. You can almost sack the Regieleki at that point and just let the Rillaboom do its work later.
Rillaboom is going to be switching in immediately for that Regieleki instead, as the Tornadus is going to be protecting itself here, not opting to set up that Tailwind just yet, just going to keep itself safe, but not the target of the attack coming out from the Zacian that is going for the Behemoth Blade into that Sarina. It has taken a little bit of chip damage, and usually Sarinas are able to survive that attack, but any bit of chip does help, and it has pushed it over the edge here. The Sarina has dropped to that Behemoth Blade.
It has, and this is a really difficult position now for Sebastian for Damahni, because he's lost his Sarina, which completely activates the Rillaboom that's just come in for Sebastian, and so now there's Fake Out pressure, there's Grassy Glide pressure, and there's still the Zacian on the field. So you're not worried about the whether the Zacian on Sebastian's side of the field takes any damage here. You're just likely to want to go into attacks to knock out the Tornadus for pretty much free, and maybe you can pick up a KO with Grassy Glide onto that Regieleki as well. So Damahni needs to be careful how he adjusts here, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he wants to go for something a little bit slower and more defensive, maybe get that Tailwind up and try to wait out the grassy terrain so that there's no priority on the field for Sebastian, but it's going to be really hard to do that.
Not if they're going to be any Tailwinds coming out. Tornadus is once again going to be switching out, and the Kyogre is going to be joining the field and getting that Drizzle up for Damahni's side of the field. But Grassy Glide is going to be fired off into the opposing Regieleki, which just survives and is able to fire off that Thunder. Now 100% accurate in the rain, doing a nice chunk of damage to that Zacian, but is going to faint to its own Life Orb recoil. So getting that extra damage coming out, but now is able to faint thanks to its own recoil. The Zacian is able to survive, fire off that Behemoth Blade into the switch-in of the Tornadus, and even though it is a resisted hit, it does do half damage to that Kyogre, and now the damage potential from the Water Spout has been severely weakened.
Yeah, that's the best kind of chip that you can get on the Kyogre there, doing half damage. A little bit more than that now that Grassy Terrain is healing it back up, and so unlikely that the Behemoth Blade is going to be able to finish the job. But, I mean, if you're Rillaboom, normally Rillaboom's carrying the Assault Vest for this exact position where the Tornadus is on the field next to the Kyogre, and you want to be able to Grassy Glide maybe once, maybe twice, just to make sure you pick up the KO on the Kyogre regardless of what happens. Now in this position, the Tornadus is only going to get one shot to launch out the Hurricane onto the Rillaboom, but it's got to do that under threat of Behemoth Blade. And if this Kyogre has no way to protect itself from the Grassy Glide from that Rillaboom, then it's going to have a lot of trouble with positioning and making sure that it can really do anything in this game. And there it is. There's the Protect.
You've got to keep yourself safe from that Grassy Glide that could come out. But the Tornadus did not set the Tailwind up throughout this game. It has to go for it right now to get that speed control going. Grassy Glide does connect into that Protect of the Kyogre, so no damage there, but Zacian is free to go for that Behemoth Blade. Tornadus was forced to go for that Tailwind, not going to put on any offensive pressure this side, this turn on this turn, and Zacian is able to pick up the KO on that Tornadus, and the Tailwind's not really going to help out when Grassy Glide's going to be coming out.
No, and I think, there's a real conversation here about information preservation. Since Damahni doesn't have anything in the back, you don't want to protect to let your opponent know, let Sebastian know in this case, whether or not the Kyogre has Protect. So maybe the better play from an information gathering point or information preservation perspective was to just go for the Tailwind and attack with Kyogre. So you mask up the fact that it's not Choice Scarf, because the Prankster Tailwind would go first and then the Kyogre would go next if it survives the grassy terrain, the grassy glide coming out from the Rillaboom. And so you lose, but you don't want to hit the forfeit button. Maybe you want the extra time of the turn animation coming out, and so you've got a bit more time to think about game two. And then you just go for the attack, and you get knocked out twice, and we're into the game. So yeah, interesting scenario there, and certainly something that Sebastian is going to take advantage of, I think, going forward into game two. But going into game two, Jamie, what do you think the adjustments that Damahni can make?
Yeah, well, we didn't really see much of the Suicune come out from Peru's side of the field to get out that Tailwind, because it wasn't really needed. You've got to get the Tailwind going for Tornadus a lot sooner, really, because it clicked it so late in the game. Most of the Pokemon were being outsped for the whole game, and at that point, when it was able to click Tailwind, the game was pretty much over at that point instead. So it probably needs to get that Tailwind going a bit sooner. You need to be getting your Kyogre into position where it can get those full HP Water Spouts, and Tailwind is the best way to be doing that. Get your Kyogre faster than the opposing Pokemon and get those full HP Water Spouts going. So really need to see a Tailwind a bit sooner coming out from that Tornadus.
Definitely, and we can see a little sneak peek of what Sebastian is bringing to the game. And it looks like the Suicune is there. So even if we get that Tailwind going and a few more Water Spouts going, there is going to be an option for Sebastian to use to tank those hits. Of course, we didn't see it in game one, but I think it was probably in the back for most of the time. And unfortunately for Damahni, Sebastian wasn't able to see that and get that little bit of extra information here, just using the Zacian and Rillaboom and the Regieleki, of course, to great effect. But we see here now the brilliant adjustment here, bringing that Mamoswine out in all of its glorious, horrible green color next to that Tornadus, while Regieleki and Rillaboom are the Pokemon of choice for Sebastian.
Hey, you always complain about the shiny greens, but that Tornadus is looking pretty green, as well as the hair of that Rillaboom. No one complains about that, but yeah, the Mamoswine is looking in a pretty good position. It's facing down the Regieleki with its ground type moves. It's taking down the Rillaboom with its ice type moves as well. So it's definitely in the position it wants to be.
Yeah, it definitely is. Fortunately for it, it does. It can get faked out unless that Serena comes in. So could be a nice little adjustment here. Serena wouldn't be threatened whatsoever by the Regieleki. Mamoswine certainly isn't. And of course, the Serena coming in would protect the Rillaboom from Grassy Glide. There I go again. Coming out from the Rillaboom on Sebastian's side of the field.
And the Serena is going to be switching in, keeping that Mamoswine safe from any fake outs or grassy glides that can come out from the Rillaboom. But it's not going to be going for any attacks, not even a U-turn here, just going to be switching straight out into the Suicune. And the Regieleki is also going to be switching out, as it has gone for that Volt Switch into what was the Tornadus, but hitting into that Serena for a little bit of damage. But as we've seen, that every little bit of damage could help when you are built to survive the Behemoth Blade from the Zacian. That extra chip could definitely put it in range of that attack for the future. But Rillaboom is going to be the Pokemon of choice, switching in from that Volt Switch of the Regieleki. And Mamoswine is going to be firing off that high horsepower into what was the Regieleki, but now a Rillaboom, and are going to be able to take that a lot more comfortably.
Yeah, so nice switch there for Sebastian, taking hits with resisted damage. But now Serena Mamoswine is on the field. I kind of like Damahni's position a lot more. I always got that Icicle Crash that could go into the Rillaboom, and Rillaboom not likely to be trained to be faster than this Mamoswine, so could be quite important. And of course, Suicune, could get the Tailwind up here, but it's going to have to do that in front of a grassy terrain Power Whip, potentially from this Serena.
Yeah, and we'll have to see if that is the move of choice coming out from the Serena. But Rillaboom did not want to take any of those Icicle Crashes that could come out from the Mamoswine. and it did switch into the Zacian, but
Ooh.
an amazing play coming out from Damahni, going for the high horsepower into what was the Rillaboom, hitting that Zacian on the switch in for a very nice chunk of damage. Scald is going to be fired off into the Mamoswine, not picking up a burn here, but also doing some very good damage to the Mamoswine. But speaking of good damage, one-shots are usually considered very good damage, and that Power Whip has just cleaned the field of that Suicune.
Yeah, it's like Shaky Accuracy, don't mind that. Just going to go for the Power Whip there and absolutely annihilate the Suicune. Going back to Sebastian now, and it's going to be quite difficult. It's like you've got this position now where Sarina being on the field stops any sort of control that the Rillaboom has in the back for Sebastian, and the Zacian can only target one thing. You kind of think that in this position it's going to be the Mamoswine that's the biggest threat, given that the Mamoswine is going to be the one that can knock out Regieleki and is immune to it, and of course can knock out that Rillaboom as well. But yeah, I think Sebastian's in a position where he's going to have to try and make a read for this position and try to maybe knock out the Sarina this turn, because if you don't start removing that Sarina, if you don't take it away from the field, your Rillaboom is just going to continue to be inactive, and certainly at the range that Mamoswine is, it's going to be under threat of a KO from Grassy Glide later on if that Sarina is removed. And not to mention the fact that you want to be able to activate that or use that Grassy Glide against Kyogre in the back as well.
Yes, the Mamoswine here is just going to be keeping itself safe from that Zacian or the Rillaboom here. The Behemoth Blade is going to be fired off into that Mamoswine, so not going to be doing any damage thanks to that Protect. Rillaboom is going to be moving before the Sarina here, going for the U-turn. Going to be able to switch itself back out into that Regieleki, but the Sarina is going to be free to move after that Rillaboom. Having the slower speed here means that it's going to potentially be able to hit into that Regieleki. If it is a U-turn, it can break the Focus Sash, or it's a triple axle instead, going to be only hitting just that one time. One time is enough to break the Focus Sash, but could be healing up just enough to maybe even get that Focus Sash back with that grassy terrain.
Yeah, indeed, and a little cheeky Protect here could be the move of choice, but you've got to start doing something a little bit aggressive here to target down Damahni's team if you're Sebastian, because that Mamoswine is just protected. Could have access to Ice Shard, should I say, for some priority damage into the Regieleki, and certainly that would have been really nice if Triple Axel had hit all of its moves. And now having to play defensively with this Mamoswine means that this Kyogre coming in is not going to be in a particularly happy position going forward.
Yeah, not if it's taking this Volt Switch, but no, the Volt Switch is going to be fired off into the Sarina instead, which is able to take it much more comfortably. Going to be once again pivoting straight back out into that Rillaboom. That's something we do see very often with all those Volt Switches and U-turns, and even passing shots we see on Incineroars, of course, as well. All the pivoting action going on. But Zacian is going to be just going on the offensive. No pivoting options for Zacian, just wants to do damage instead, and it is going to be doing some nice damage to that Kyogre. Once again, doing over half damage with that resisted Behemoth Blade. And speaking of that pivoting, the U-turn coming out from the Sarina into the Zacian, just going to do a tiny bit more damage, but of course going to be switching out once again. And the last Pokemon to move for this turn, that means that Damahni gets to switch in this Pokemon without fear of any moves coming out this turn.
No, not at all. And we've seen behind the scenes that Sebastian has Play Rough available on his Zacian, so you've got to expect maybe that the Play Rough after the Behemoth Blade would easily be enough to knock out that Kyogre. And we already know that it can carry Protect, so that's definitely something that Damahni has to decide on whether he's going to use or not. And of course, whether he's going to be content to just maybe Protect, set up the Tailwind, maybe sacrifice his Tornadus, maybe not, but set himself up for the slightly longer game where he can bring in the Sarina and get a big Water Spout off and pressure this Zacian, as well as that Regieleki in the back.
Yeah, you always have to be worried about that, Serena, especially when you have the Rillaboom on the field with the potential to go for Fake Out as well, not even just the Grassy Glides, which would be enough to pick up the knockout on this Kyogre here, but you still have access to the Fake Outs. That might be why the Tornadus is going for the Protect here, as well as the Kyogre, so just going to be burning out the potential of that Fake Out, which did end up coming out in the face of that potential Serena switch in, which did hit into that Tornadus, and Play Rough did try and take out that Kyogre, so a really nice play, just the double protect, nice and safe when you've got the Fake Out to burn, so you don't need to even play around with that. So you still got the potential of that Serena waiting in the back though.
You have, and this is one of the difficult positions that the Tornogre teams tend to face themselves with because, Rillaboom on the field, fortunately, actually doesn't have to deal with it this particular turn because the grassy terrain has also ended this turn, which is really, really good timing for Damahni because now you don't have to toss up whether you bring in the Serena or not. You just don't have to. You can just go for attacks here, whether that's a Hurricane and an Ice Beam, or a Tailwind and an Ice Beam, or Tailwind and a Water Spout. But it is just going to be that Hurricane, and it is enough to pick up the KO on that Rillaboom with a critical hit. Oh my god, what a big KO for Damahni.
That's a huge KO. Normally Rillabooms are able to survive that with the Assault Vest. That might have been why this Kyogre was doubling up with a Ice Beam. Almost certainly was hitting into that Rillaboom, but just going to hit into the Protect of the Zacian there. So really, really strong play coming out from Damahni. There was the option to go for that Behemoth Blade or even play rough with the Zacian, but able to take out that Rillaboom thanks to that Hurricane getting that critical hit.
Exactly, and now the Tailwind can just go up and Kyogre can maybe go on the offensive. Not that clear, depends on how this Kyogre is trained. If it isn't trained to be faster than Regieleki, then we've got some problems here for Damahni. If it is, it's just Tailwind and Water Spout, and that should be enough to pick up definitely the KO on both of these Pokemon, and no Pokemon that Sebastian has in the back to switch in and mitigate those hits now that he's down to his final two.
It's not a Water Spout though, it's a Hydro Pump coming out from the Kyogre, which does connect with the Zacian. That is going to be a very strong attack and able to pick up the KO on that Zacian. No attack coming out into the Regieleki though, no spread attacks because it was just a single target Hydro Pump, able to fire off that Electro Web, doing some very nice damage to both this Tornadus and that Kyogre, and of course going to be dropping that speed as well. So we'll have to see if that speed drop is enough to allow that Regieleki to be able to take this game.
Well, unfortunately, not going to have any options to take this game because of that Mamoswine being in the back. And if you don't take out the Mamoswine, that's why it's so important in these sort of matchups. Because if you don't take out the Mamoswine or take out the ground type of choice, while you have a Regieleki on the field, then you just can't do anything against those ground types with that Regieleki. So, Tord coming out from the Tornadus, not really going to do anything. Electro Web going to hit into both of these targets, probably pick up the knockout on both, but then it's going to be Serena and the Mamoswine in the back, and that'll be going into game 3 with game 2 going to Damahni.
Yeah, definitely will. And so it was actually a very good option for Sebastian not to forfeit there. I don't think we'd seen the taunt so far from that Tornadus. So getting some information, even when you've definitely lost, if you can get that last little bit of information going into the next game, that is important here because the Regieleki can never beat this Mamoswine. It was always going to be able to take the win for Damahni. So just squeezing out that tiny bit more from the Tornadus because you've seen the Protect as well coming out from the Tornadus. You know its full moveset at this point. You don't have to guess about that final move anymore. Usually it's holding something like an Ice Beam, maybe a Rain Dance as well, to be able to overwrite the weathers that can counter the Kyogre. But now you've got the full information on that Tornadus. So very good decision there not to forfeit on that previous turn.
Yeah, definitely. It does make all the difference knowing what these Pokemon have available to them because Tornadus is one of the Pokemon, is it like 5, maybe 6 moves that you want on it, and you've got to pick 4 of them, right? So you get into these positions where it's like, I want Taunt for the Trick Room, and I want Tailwind to outspeed my opponent, and what if my opponent gets Tailwind as well, so I want to have Icy Wind available to myself, and I still need to attack with things, so Hurricane's there, and oh wait, what if they have Fake Out and an attack, and then I need Protect. So yeah, that's the trials and tribulations of running Tornadus in these sort of teams. You have to pick something, but a nice adjustment there for Damahni, I think, to be able to just control that game a bit better. It turns out that the Mamoswine was really important, not for that Landorus on Sebastian's side of the field, but actually for that Regieleki and pressuring the Rillaboom turned out to be the most important. And of course, we saw how much damage that it did high horsepower on that Zacian as well. So really good information going into game 3 here for both players. So we'll have to see going into game 3 what these players adjust with.
Yeah, the Mamoswine was a great adjustment, so it definitely will be interesting to see if there's any adaptations coming out from Sebastian's side of the field. They do have some very strong Pokemon to be able to deal with the Mamoswine in the Suicune, the Rillaboom, and even the Zacian as well. If you just don't get hit by the high horsepower, Behemoth Blade's going to be doing a huge amount of damage to the Mamoswine. Don't think we've seen the item on the Mamoswine yet. He is usually carrying something like that Focus Sash, so it can at least take the hit of the Behemoth Blade and respond with respond with the high horsepower.
Definitely. And one of the other things that we didn't yet see, I mean, it launched out the move in game 2, but we didn't actually see it connect, was that play rough on the Zacian. Into that double protect on the Tornadus and Kyogre that ran out the grassy terrain. And that is quite interesting because if you manage to pick up the Kyogre with a play rough on the switch in, which is very possible position to be in, you just, instead of being able to knock something out for sure with Behemoth Blade, you probably knock it out anyway with Play Rough. That is to say, if it hits. But then if the Kyogre switches in, you're in a great spot, and nothing on Damahni's team resists Play Rough at all. So there's no good switch-ins, there's no good pivoting. And that could be maybe quite crucial for Sebastian to be able to get that just extra little bit of damage. The Suicune hangs on a little bit more, but maybe it'll be in a position to knock out the Kyogre with a Scold following on, and do something slightly different there if it doesn't have to deal with this Sarina in this game.
Maybe you try not to set up the grassy terrain this time to give that little extra boost to the Power Whip. I could have tipped it over the edge to get that KO on the Suicune, because Suicune is actually pretty good going into this game, especially if we see the Mamoswine, but we are seeing the Sarina instead paired up with that Tornadus, and we're going to be sticking with that Regieleki and the Zacian coming out for Sebastian's side.
We are, and we've seen this before. I mean, in previous games where Behemoth Blade and Electro Web are enough to pick up the KO onto Sarina, and it makes sure that the Sarina goes after the Zacian, but quite like the play that we saw just locked in there for Sebastian, not going for the Electro Web, because if that Tailwind goes up and the Sarina attacks first, it could be going for something like a U-turn. And if it goes for a U-turn and you Behemoth Blade into the slot and that slot becomes, say, something like Mamoswine or even Kyogre, we saw how much damage that did on both counts. And so you end up in this great position where if you're Sebastian, you're just doing loads and loads of damage right off the bat.
Won't be doing damage with the first attack at least, because Sarina has just switched straight out into the Mamoswine, so going to be able to resist those electric type attacks coming out. As Tailwind is set up from that Tornadus and Volt Switch hits into that Mamoswine, meaning that Regieleki is staying on the field this turn, but Zacian is still able to follow up into that Mamoswine with that Behemoth Blade, doing so much damage and revealing that it is in fact the Focus Sash on that Mamoswine, so able to survive just for this turn.
Yeah, and probably not going to be able to survive for too many more turns unless Damahni does something quite defensive with it, either protect or going for a switch out as well. Regieleki holding the Focus Sash as well is quite interesting here, because if you're Regieleki, you only get hit by... you could get KO'd in this turn, but only if Damahni decides to double up into the Regieleki, and that leaves Zacian completely open. So you really have to, if you're Damahni, you've not yet got all of your options that you want to have on the field, and so you've got the Tailwind up, you've only got 3 turns, you've got to pivot really quickly and get that Kyogre on the field so you can actually start doing some damage. Otherwise Sebastian's just going to run out the Tailwind and be able to hit back, and he's going to hit really hard.
Another way would be to match the Tailwinds, and Suicune could potentially do that as it has switched in here for the Regieleki, but we're seeing some Protects coming out from both players. The Tornadus is going for the Protect, as well as the Zacian that is protecting itself from that high horsepower, so a little bit of not too much coming out on that turn. The Suicune is able to get in for free, though.
It is, and I like that hard switch coming out from the Sebastian, correctly reading that Protect, and obviously knowing that the Volt Switch doesn't affect either Protect or the Mamoswine. Kind of clear that the Mamoswine's going to be wanting to do some attacking turns. As you rightly say, Jamie, the Tailwind could be going up onto the field, but if you're Sebastian, I'd be fairly content actually to maybe go for a Snarl if the Suicune has it, knock out that Mamoswine almost surely anyway, drop the special attack of that Tornadus and make Rillaboom in the back for Sebastian a little bit more safe going into this turn. And definitely avoiding a Taunt as well coming out from this Tornadus.
Yeah, that Taunt going into the Suicune means that Tailwind will not be matched this turn. And High Horsepower is able to connect this time into the Zacian, again doing a really, really nice chunk of damage. But Zacian able to hang on, fire back with that Behemoth Blade, hitting into that Tornadus. We know it's not carrying the Focus Sash, as that was on the Mamoswine, and it is able to pick up the KO on that Tornadus. And the Suicune did go on the offensive. It didn't try and match the Tailwind. That means it is able to pick up the knockout on this 1 HP Mamoswine with that Scald. So picking up a double knockout here with just one more turn of Tailwind to stall out.
Yeah, pretty crucial timing as well. I mean, you can always protect with the Zacian this turn. That means the Tailwind is over. Probably, well, even if the Suicune had it available to it, which usually it doesn't, you'd expect it not to. It has been taunted, and it does have to stare down the Serena on Damahni's side of the field, but Serena out of the terrain probably isn't going to be able to pick up the KO on the Suicune, and so you have the opportunity to maybe go for a Snarl, maybe go for a Scald into the Serena slot, get that little bit of chip damage that you need for Zacian to finish it off. And of course, you've always got that Sash Regieleki in the back, so the Kyogre isn't looking like it's going to be in a great position going forward.
It's got to make use of this last turn of Tailwind here, and doing what it does best in the last turn of Tailwind, clicking that Water Spout button. But Zacian did protect itself this turn to try and stall out that last turn of Tailwind, but doing some still very nice damage to that Suicune. And Triple Axle is going to be fired off into that Suicune, almost certainly trying to catch that Rillaboom. And I'm only going to connect 2 times as well here into the Suicune. Not going to matter too much. The third hit wouldn't have done much damage anyway, but crucially that Serena is going to avoid the Snarls, so going to avoid any extra chip damage onto that Serena, so maybe able to survive this Behemoth Blade now.
Yeah, probably, but it's going to have to do it with an attack from potentially Suicune as well. It's holding a Citrus Berry or something, and it is at the highest HP range it could be. Maybe it activates a berry and survives a Scald even in the rain, but it's fairly unlikely, I think, at this point. And the Suicune's probably happy to just keep on snarling away, and if the Serena goes to pretty low health, then it'd be very easy for the Rillaboom to pick it up after the Behemoth Blade lands into the Serena.
I would definitely call that low health. Behemoth Blade does that very often here. And Hydro Pump, unfortunately, does have that shaky accuracy, does miss the Zacian. And of course, the shaky accuracy of the Power Whip, but this time is going to connect onto the Suicune, is enough to pick up the KO. So Serena able to take care of that Suicune.
Yeah, and surprised to see the Suicune going faster than... the Serena going faster than the Suicune there. But that does make a little bit of a difference for Damahni. Unfortunately, I think it's probably a little bit too late. Serena unlikely to be able to protect, and now you're in a position where you can just Behemoth Blade and use an electric move with Regieleki into the Kyogre. Maybe you don't pick up 2 KOs, but you get damn close, and so it really looks like Sebastian's going to be wrapping up this game fairly quickly from this position.
Yeah, there's not too much else that can be done at this point. So you get the KO onto the Serena with the Zacian, and you get the electric move into the Kyogre. Maybe able to survive the Thunderbolt, but with the Focus Sash on the Regieleki, that's pretty much going to seal up this game. And so we've got to go through the motions here of that Thunderbolt. Kyogre is going to be able to survive it at least, and the Behemoth Blade is going to be fired off. We'll pick up the KO on either of these Pokemon, but is going to be targeting down that Serena to pick up that last little bit of HP. So Kyogre at pretty much no HP, going to be taking on a Zacian and a Sash Regieleki, almost certainly not going to be able to do it. But Hydro Pump at least connects this time into the Zacian, so you do get to take out that Zacian, a revenge for dodging that last turn. So you do get that final knockout, but then Regieleki is just going to be able to clean up this game with one more Thunderbolt, or even just the Grassy Glide or Fake Out from the Rillaboom at this point.
Yeah, indeed, and it's dealer's choice as to which Pokemon gets the knockout for Sebastian. It could be the Rillaboom, could be the Regieleki. What's quite clear is that Sebastian has all of the momentum here, and Damahni doesn't have really any options at all left available to him. So Peru's going to get that final win that it needed. And that's really crucial because now Japan is out. Peru is going to be advancing onto the next stage of the tournament alongside France. And a great victory for both teams there to be getting to the playoffs. And commiserations for the other teams in their groups, of course. But what a way to take that match in style.
Yeah, very, very strong showing coming out there for Peru. Able to adjust very well as in going into that game 3. And yeah, the Mammoth Swine was a really, really cool pick and really showed off what it could do in that game 2. But some good adjustments meant it wasn't quite able to cut it for that game 3. So yeah, like you said, Peru and France are going to be the 2 advancing from that group. And Japan are now knocked out. They weren't in control. They had to rely on Peru losing this round. But Peru did at least draw, and that's all they needed.
Absolutely all they needed. And unfortunately, it's going to be a quick break from us, but do stay tuned. We have another match between India and Portugal coming up in just a moment. So we will be right back in just a moment.